Beloveds, we find ourselves once again at the threshold of Advent, that season of waiting and wondering where darkness lengthens and the chill of winter sets in. But for us, as Unitarian Universalists, Advent is not only a Christian season, it's a spiritual invitation, a call to deep listening, to holy longing, to hopeful preparation for the world that we still dream of. The word Advent means coming, but not only the coming of one person or one story. It's the arrival of something new that changes everything. It's the stirring of hope in the midst of despair, the birth of compassion in a world grown cynical, the arrival of courage in weary hearts. Kelly Nokindea, in her book, The First Advent in Palestine, reminds us that the first Advent was not quiet, nor was it sentimental. It was lived under empire, amid oppression, occupation, and fear. It was a time when people yearned for liberation, when every act of hope was also an act of resistance. Advent, she writes, begins in the shadow of empire among people who dare to believe that God's story was bigger than Caesar's story. Sound familiar? Now, many of us have been told that Advent is about waiting. But waiting for what? For the world to fix itself? For oppression to ease on its own? For those in power to wake up to the suffering? For the grief of our people to somehow fade away? How long must we wait? Are we to wait while children are buried under rubble, while families are separated from one another, torn apart by greed, while trans lives are debated in courts and legislatures as though our humanity is optional? No, beloveds, that's not what I think it's about. It's not a season of waiting. It's the season of waking. The first Advent began under empire among people who could not afford to wait. Not a pious stillness. It's a steady heartbeat of resistance. The first Advent began with a teenage girl saying yes to a dangerous calling. It began with refugees fleeing violence, with midwives, carpenters, prophets, and dreamers who refused to wait for permission to live. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is quoted as saying, "We are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late." Beloveds, we can't wait for justice to become convenient. We cannot wait for comfort to come before compassion. We can't wait for safety to arrive before we act in solidarity. Waiting, when it serves the status quo, becomes complicit. And complicity is death to our collective soul. The season doesn't call us to be passively patient. It calls us to be wholly urgent. To light the candle not because the darkness is gone, but because it is here and because our light matters. Hope in Advent sense is not optimism. It's not pretending everything is fine when it clearly isn't. Hope is that stubborn act of defiance. It looks at the world as it is and refuses to believe that it must stay that way. In the first Advent in Palestine, Nicodemus writes that hope was born not in a palace, but in a borrowed room to people living under military rule. It was a protest against despair. Our faith, too, is a protest against despair, because Unitarian Universalism does not wait for a Messiah to fix the world for us. We believe that our shared power to bring about the sacred in ourselves, to incarnate love, to embody compassion, is to midwife justice. Every time you reach out to someone who is lonely, every time we show up at a rally, every time we refuse to dehumanize, hope gets born again. Now, some might be asking, what about peace? What about the peace of the season? I would remind you that peace is not the absence of tension. It's the presence of justice. The peace of Advent is not the quiet comfort of privilege. It's the courageous peace of those who stand in solidarity, who speak truth, even when your tongue trembles. Nicodemus reminds us that Mary's song, the Magnificat, was a revolutionary hymn. She sang, "He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly," proclaiming a world turned upside down. Again, sound like a familiar action that echoes through centuries, calling us to imagine a peace that includes everyone, especially the ones most left out. In Advent, when we light that candle of joy, it's not a glittering joy of the holiday advertisements. It's the joy that comes from surviving, that rises even after grief, that sings in the face of empire, daring to dance while the world still groans. It's the same joy we glimpse when communities rebuild after storms, when reconciliation takes root, when love wins in small but real ways. In UUism, we know that joy and justice are intertwined, and joy itself, resistance. To find delight in one another, to celebrate beauty, to laugh loudly in a weary world, these are all sacred acts. And finally, when we gather in love, our hearts full, it's not the sentimental greeting cards, but the fierce, embodied love, a love that Christians, true Christians, believe that Jesus lived, that Mary risked, and we are still called to practice. Love that feeds the hungry, love that welcomes the refugee, affirms the trans child, shelters the unhoused, and insists that no one is beyond belonging. Advent love is incarnational. It takes on form in our hands and our hearts. It is what we in Unitarian Universalism means when we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all. It's that love that we build the beloved community on. Not someday, but now. Advent invites us not to a passive waiting, but to a courageous readiness, to prepare our hearts for what has not yet come, and to participate in its coming. The holy does not arrive only in churches or mangers. It arrives in every act of love, every gesture of kindness, every dream of justice that refuses to die. So in this season, as candles are lit and songs are sung, May we remember we cannot wait to hope. We cannot wait to make peace. And we cannot wait to love, because we are the ones we've been waiting for. May you enter this season with joy in your heart. Amen. Ashe. Blessed be, and may it be so.